Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Last March, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences announced that they were adding a new Oscar category for Best Achievement in Casting. Now, anyone who works in the industry knows that casting is an essential part of the filmmaking process, but I don't know a lot about the specifics. So I'm happy that casting director Allison Estrin agreed to answer some of my questions. Allison, your credits date back to 2010 and include Billions, The Other Two, Bupkis, and a slew of movies. Welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I'm glad you're here. I've been looking forward to this. A note to listeners, I'm guessing that today's conversation will be spoiler-free, but Allison, I do have to ask if you are inclined to spill something like, I don't know, who you cast as a surprise villain in, say, Billions or some other show, then please put a spoiler warning on that before you do.
I will, no problem.
Okay, with that understanding, we can get underway. Let's start by talking about casting in general. Now, a simple definition, casting is about choosing actors that play the various roles in a production. To give our listeners a little more context, though, talk to me about some of the challenges that the simple definition doesn't really capture.
Casting also, a big part of it is working with the director, sometimes the writer as well, on the overall picture. And then it has the other aspect of working with the producers and the studios to cast people that can either help get a movie made financially, or will be, that valuable face on a poster for a TV show sometimes. So it kind of ranges from the smaller, amazing creative conversations to also the truly just business aspect of it.
Now, I know that actors often thank casting agents for recognizing or them getting roles. What kind of relationship do you have with the actors? Is it just through casting a specific project, or do you get to know them and think about what they might be good for beyond a single project?
I have a really wonderful relationship with a lot of actors. There are a lot of actors that I would call very dear friends that I've gotten to know so much over the years, sometimes from auditioning or teaching classes. And then, the cast of Billions so many of them have become really close to me because we've spent so much time together over the years that I have, through that, gotten to know the sort of things that they want to be doing, the broader parts of what I think they're able to do, and bring them in and suggest them for other roles. And some, are actors that I maybe first saw in their school showcases and had generals with and got to know that way. Also, New York is a pretty small community. So, we're at the same parties and events and
Right.
just really like to see people as humans and vice versa. That's really, it's actually just kind of a joy that there are so many actors I've gotten to know so well over the years.
In talking about that, it occurs to me that even in the general vernacular, we sometimes talk about an actor being typecast, where they're sort of expected to play certain roles on what they've done in the past. But I can see in your role as a casting agent, there's a little bit of tension there because there are going to be writers, producers, and directors that are expecting what they saw before. And for some actors, that might be fine. But for some actors, in trying to break that, that can be really difficult. How do you manage those tensions?
That's so interesting. I was actually just talking about that with the director yesterday, because he was lamenting about the fact that for a certain size budget film, we often have to make offers and we're not really able to do auditions if we're looking for a certain size name. And because we have to make offers, it does actually mean that it's harder to go outside the box. There might be actors that I know they can do it because maybe they've done something in an audition room or something, or that I just have my gut hunch that they should be able to do it, but the director hasn't seen them play that before. And so it's a bigger risk to take. So I'm finding it, I love to think outside the box. I think we often need to know an actor in the box before we can take them out. But I love to do that. I do find that the process of offer only kind of stops being able to look outside the box all the time. But to me, it's really exciting when we get to it. It's kind of, you know, my favorite thing. I love being able to see someone do something that they haven't done before and really just soar.
Now, there's a lot of different aspects of casting, and I'd imagine where your skills come into play can vary from project to project. So I'm going to ask you some specific questions as we suss some of that out. I'm also going to invite you to use as many specific examples that you want. But again, at the same time, and maybe we should talk about it, there's also that sort of confidential nature about what happens in the casting process. And actually, maybe you can speak to that before we get into it, what you can talk about, and then what really needs to stay confidential because of the process.
Sure. A big part of the confidential side of it is that I always want an actor and a director to feel as safe with me as possible. So, you know, for instance, I have seen some truly remarkable auditions in my life of actors who didn't book the job, but were so incredible that I've never forgotten it. I wouldn't ever share those names because I just wouldn't want them to be in a position of, you know, everyone knowing they didn't get a job or something like that. As well as, you know, one of my favorite parts of casting is having the long debates with the director over who should get what role. But when the director actually starts working with the actor that's chosen, you never want that actor to feel like maybe they weren't their first choice. So that's the stuff I usually do, try and keep it private, except maybe over a good cocktail at a dinner party will I maybe share, but probably not on a podcast.
I understand. We all of my guests have those stories, and I completely respect that. And I look forward to trying to catch you at one of those cocktail parties when we get a chance. So let's talk first about the differences between a major film, let's just call it a big budget film, and an indie film, how they might take a different approach to casting.
Yeah, I would say usually it's the studio involvement versus the indie film. And with the studio being involved, more often than not, there's already the lead role cast.
Because that's part of how the project came together. There's a headliner already interested in the project.
Exactly. So often when I've done those films, it's a lot more about doing the supporting and day player roles. Often it's a film that's shooting in New York. I very much consider myself a New York casting director. I love my New York actors. And so it's then putting the puzzle pieces around to support the one or two lead marquee actors that have already been cast. For an indie film, especially of a smaller budget, it's a much longer process. And I'm usually involved in those films sometimes for years before it starts shooting, because I can sometimes be, one of the lucky people that gets to read a script very early, have early conversations with the director, producers, writer, and we have to go about the process of attaching actors so that we can get financing for the film. So I become much more involved and engaged when we're doing that part of the process. And so that ends up being kind of a different type of relationship that I end up having with the team because of that it truly can take years, whereas a studio film, I might be on it for like 6 weeks.
Well, that's very interesting because the way you describe it, I would think that those indie films actually sound like more fun. But at the same time, if you're not even sure the film is going to happen unless casting is successful, that can be kind of frustrating for everybody involved.
It can be very stressful and it can be heartbreaking. But it's also so much more rewarding when it happens. At this point, I try to only attach myself as a casting director to films that when I read the script, I just think it's so good, or it's a director that just has such a strong voice and has to get it out there, because I do have to believe in it in such a strong way. I have to really sell it and be the advocate for that film for a long time. I mean, very, very rare that the first person that we offer a script to says yes. It's just kind of a known thing that's, you take a big swing. Amazing if it happens that they say yes, but I can't actually remember a time that happened.
Now, as I mentioned at the top, you have numerous films on your resume. Are there any specific films that you're particularly proud of how they came together?
I would say on the more recent front, me and my casting partner Henry Russell Bergstein had the privilege of casting the film Mass, which won the Robert Altman Award at the Independent Spirit Awards, and from beginning to end, that was just a complete pleasure. We had a great relationship with the director Fran Kranz, who is also an actor, and the film is truly beautiful and heartbreaking and difficult. And we had the wonderful ability to really just cast the best actors for the job, which is such an exciting thing when that happens. And it was, for actors over 40 who just really were wonderful and wanted to sit in a room and really act. And it became a really exciting process. And the fact that the film was so well received really meant the world to us.
Let's pivot to talk about television. You've got some major credits in this area as well. What's the difference between a TV series and this process we described for film?
For a TV series, I've been able to do it a couple of different ways at this point, which is great. But again, more often than not, they come to me when there are actors already attached. There have been a few times the limited series Super Pumped that was on Showtime, I was able to be in from the very, very beginning, so that was able to include casting Joseph Gordon-Levitt. But more often than not, like obviously Bupkis was Pete Davidson was very clearly already attached.
Yes. Yeah, Pete Davidson was going to be at the center of that cast group.
Yeah, so that really kind of is the main difference. And then there is the aspect of knowing if it's an ongoing series or a limited series, because there are different actors available, different actors who are willing to do limited versus ongoing. An ongoing can end up being a very, very long commitment. Billions was 7 seasons, but I think it took 9 years from pilot to end. So, that's a very long commitment in your life that we know that we're asking actors to do. So those are really the big differences. And then with a TV series, there's actually just more cooks in the kitchen. There's more studio execs involved, development execs, casting execs, which aren't always on. Certainly there's no casting execs that we talk to on independent film. So we just have a lot more people to communicate with, and that we're trying to get approvals on. And so if you are an actor and you book a lead role in a TV show, you know that you have gone through many, many levels of approval and should feel very, very proud of yourself when it happens.
Now, when you mentioned the example of Pete Davidson as the lead on Bupkis, I don't know that this was true, but I'm imagining he's also a producer on a show like that.
Yes.
And so is he also involved in the casting process as far as choosing folks, or does he approach it as an actor, or is there a different angle that an actor takes wearing the producer hat in choosing the rest of the cast?
Pete was very involved in the casting. There were roles that were just simply written for specific people. So, that check done. But yeah, he watched auditions and was very involved. I would say though, on all of the shows, at a certain point, if you're a working actor, you have worked with a lot of other actors. And so more often than not, I have gotten, emails or text messages saying like, well, have you thought about so-and-so for this role? Which is great. I love to know who someone else enjoys working with. It only helps the process when they're all on set together. It doesn't always work out, but I love getting those recommendations.
Allison, during the introduction, I mentioned that you've had film and television credits since 2010. Talk to me about how casting has changed as the industry has changed over the last 14 years.
It's actually changed quite a bit. I mentioned earlier in this about the offer only aspect of it, which I think wasn't necessarily there 10 years ago as much. There were a lot more, well, I would say actors willing to audition, but sometimes it's just the agents not wanting their actors to audition.
And so to clarify, the offer only is that you're saying that some actors won't come in and read for the part. The director or the producers need to be so clear that they're ready to just put money on the table.
Yes, correct. Correct. Where I think that there was a time years ago where an actor auditioning was just a regular part of an actor's job. And at a certain point in an actor's career, that has stopped being the case, and they will just get offers for different things. And I think that there's good and bad to that, but it does make it a different process, I think, than it did when I first started. Also, Zoom, being able to Zoom, being able to do self-tapes. Self-tapes simply wasn't something that we did years ago. It was a very, very rare thing if that somehow happened. Even really just pre-pandemic, for Billions, before the pandemic, there was not a single actor that we cast off of a self-tape. They had to come into the room and audition for me, and that's how we cast it. After the pandemic, we didn't have a choice. And so we ended up obviously casting the last couple of seasons with self-tapes and Zooms. And I think it makes a difference. I think that actors not having the ability to be in the room sometimes with a casting director or director and getting feedback can really make a difference in if they get cast. There are a lot of really, really wonderful actors I know that haven't been able to work in the last couple of years just because they're not as good at self-tapes as they are coming into a room and auditioning. So I do think that that has changed a great deal over the years. In the good sense of it, I've been able to see more people for roles and see people from all over the country or all over the world. And that's something that I, in the past, would have to travel to a different area, or we would hire local casting directors to do a big search. That now I'm able to get tapes from London and Australia and, obviously LA and Chicago and Atlanta, and all of that makes my job a lot more fun to just be able to keep it that open.
Now, I wanted to ask you some questions about your relationship with what's happening on set. I remember when I was working in television, whether it be Party of Five or West Wing, we have these day players, people who are just coming in for a single role. Maybe it's only a couple of lines. And we're getting like these deal memos, sometimes the day of, that explains what kind of trailer they're supposed to get and what they have to sign or what their deal is. Talk to me about the casting agent's side of that relationship with the ADs on set.
Hopefully we have a really good relationship with the ADs. That's always an ideal world. Certainly on Billions, when you have 7 seasons, I got very close to all of them. And there are quite a few shows where I've been able to establish a really good workflow type relationship with them. But I think that the main thing is as much information as possible, just as they're dealing with, wardrobe needs to know when things are shooting, locations obviously needs to know, production design, like everyone needs as much information as possible all the time. We never want to cast someone last minute. That's never the ideal way to do it. Sometimes something's been rewritten. Sometimes an actor had to be replaced last minute for whatever reason. So things can be last minute, but in an ideal world, we want to give everyone, including the actors, much time as possible so that there is as much rehearsal and, everyone's comfortable, and, we don't want it to be last minute for sure. So really, my relationships, something else I would say that's changed is the ability to text message.
Right.
I now True, like I can text so quickly and at all hours. Whereas, back in the day, if we weren't anywhere near set, we just might not know that information. Now that flow is so much easier than it ever used to be.
I also dated myself with the shows I mentioned.
I love them. I love them.
But one aspect of television production at the time is we're talking about 20, 22 episodes in a season. A lot of the episodes aren't even written when we're starting production. And so there was this sort of ongoing relationship of figuring things out. With this move towards shorter seasons, where we're talking 8, 10 episodes, does that make it easier or harder for casting to find the right people and get them in?
It does make it easier because it gives us more time, as well as also knowing what the basic arc of an actor's role is going to be. I've definitely had the experience of casting someone in one episode and having no clue, and them having no clue that they were going to, be the bad guy, or have some other type of relationship with someone. There can be a lot of things that we don't all know. So when we have all of the scripts, or at least like the basic outlines of all of the scripts of a season, I think that I can do my job better in making sure that we cast someone that I know will be able to make a certain turn later on. I definitely love having all of the scripts, or as many as possible. Also, these days we crossboard so much more. So sometimes we will cast people from episode 2 and they're shooting, the same day as episode 10. Just having that information helps us schedule people better, knowing, okay, well, we love this actor, but we know they're not going to be available in December. And so they're, we can't use them for this role at this time. Crossboarding is another major thing that has changed over the last many years.
Now, I want to look ahead to the Oscars. The first Oscar statue is going to be awarded in 2026 for a film that's released in 2025. So we've got some runway before we get there. But recognizing casting is not a new thing. For folks who are not aware, the Casting Society of America has been honoring casting professionals since 1985 with the Artios Awards. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it the Artios Awards?
Yes, the Artios Awards.
Now, there are more than 20 categories, and they cover film, television, theater, and commercials. There's a process in place for recognizing what casting does. Could you shed some light for folks who might not be familiar about sort of what that criteria is going to be? How do you look at a project and say, that was good casting?
That's a good question. With the Artios Awards, it is casting directors are being nominated by other casting directors, similar to the SAG Awards that way. So I think we all as an industry have a good idea of maybe what was particularly hard about casting a certain project. It's also separated by budgets, which I think is a really helpful thing. And because as we've just talked about, that, I understand that the casting of, Oppenheimer was really different from the casting of Sheva Baby. Like there's just a very different type of what we need to do as casting directors when we have a different size budget or a different level of director. Neither is easier or harder, it's just different work. So I think that ends up being a huge part of the criteria that at least I'm looking at. Certainly when I see a film that has incredible kids or teenagers, I personally know just how hard that is to cast. And so that will always be something I want to give accolades for. I think also when there are films that are particularly ensemble based, when you're creating a family or just creating a group of friends, and they truly feel like a family or really feel like a group of friends, I think that is a really great criteria to look at.
Allison, you brought up a good point about how the Artios Awards, which are exclusive to casting, much like the SAG Awards or the DGA Awards, break film into different categories, which makes sense because it's very different casting a big budget studio film versus an indie feature. However, what that means, though, is that when you take 8 categories, 5 nominees each, that's 40 films that are considered the top of their category. What criteria do you think we're going to use to separate 5 of these for the Oscars that casting directors, you as a group, actually think, yes, these 5 films represent our work?
With the Oscars, there is an understanding that most likely the films that are nominated for Best Picture will also be the films nominated for Best Casting. The reality is that if a film is nominated for Best Picture, the cast had a huge amount to do with that. Just as most of the time the actors nominated for Best Actor, Actress, Supporting are almost always also a part of a nominated film. So my guess is that that's how that will work. Hopefully there are some movies that are able to slip in there a little differently that people can look at and just say, you know what, is this film going to be nominated for every single award? I don't know, but it truly just had a wonderful ensemble that I want to recognize. Or like I said, something that has a lot of teenagers that everyone was discovered. How exciting that could be something that would be recognized a little differently than maybe one that is nominated for Best Picture.
I think it's interesting, but probably self-evident that Best Picture is also going to be recognized for its cast and the casting process that informed it. But what are your thoughts to imagine being on a film like that? How do you pitch it? And what I'm thinking about is for costumes or cinematography, the work speaks for itself. I know for visual effects, they put together reels that kind of show what the breakdown one and how it comes together. For casting, what sort of package or what sort of case do you make for yourself that would help you stand out other than just the films that people liked?
That's a really great question that I'm not sure I actually have a full answer to. I think that, we want to say that the cast speaks for itself, or someone's specific performance. So, maybe it is pulling out a particular scene or something like that. And I believe that that's actually just how they do that with the Emmys. I think it really is just picking an episode that you think is most well-rounded and showing a cast. I'm not sure if there would ever be an opportunity to perhaps show someone's audition. It becomes harder. Some of these movies, people don't audition for. So I don't know. But I think that it would be about showing either the full movie or really scenes that really highlight someone's specific performance or an ensemble's performance together.
Well, this is a developing question. As we said, it'll be next year's films that have the first opportunity to make their case for Oscar nominations. And it'll be in 2026 before we get to see something actually chosen. But Allison, please follow us along on this. When we do our Oscar coverage, I hope you'll come back. We can talk more about casting.
Yes, I would love to. Also, just to say, I think there's also just a retroactive interest to me of, I don't know if a Marvel film is going to get nominated for Best Picture, but I do know that Sarah Finn created an incredible world. And it would be very hard to just look at one particular film in the Marvel universe when really it is just about, all of these people have become, so famous in their own right and had led their own movies, and casting that entire world similar to, casting of the Star Wars world or things like that are also so different than just that one film that could get nominated for something. So my hope for the future is that there is some sort of being able to look back and say, this casting director really changed the face of how we look at different stars now.
And so you mentioned Sarah Finn. I'm assuming she was the casting director for
Yes.
all these Marvel movies, but not a name I was familiar with, not being aware of that work.
Yes, Sarah Finn casts all of the Marvel films.
Well, we're going to be learning more about this world, Allison. You've given us a little entry. As I said, we're going to bring you back. On that note, we'll call it a wrap. Thanks so much for being here.
Great. Thank you so much.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. As you are aware, you'll find my contact info on our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Allison, what work do you have coming out soon where people should be watching and going, oh, wow, that's my Allison cast?
A pilot that I just worked on this past spring was picked up for FX, and we're going to start shooting the rest of the fall, and that'll come out, I think, in April, something like that. I'm very, very excited. It's a half-hour comedy for FX that I think will be great.
You're not allowed to name that show yet? Or you're going to keep us in
I
the dark?
believe the name is changing, so when I can tell you the name, you will know the name.
All right, yeah, let us know so we know what to watch for it. My closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirt, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.